Hey everyone, and welcome back to Front-End Expert. In this video, we will be discussing what happens to conflicting CSS declarations. For example, here we have two rule sets. The first selects anchor tags with an href attribute of algoexpert.io and sets their color to be green. The second selects anchor tags inside of sections with a class of links and sets their color to be red. But this raises a question: what happens if an anchor tag is inside of a section with class links and it has the href attribute set to algoexpert.io? Will it be green or red? So the way CSS actually handles this is through what it calls specificity. The more specific of selectors that are used to select the elements, the higher weighting the related declarations will get. So essentially we say that the most specific selector is the one that gets used, and by default, if all of the selectors have the same specificity, then it will just use whichever one was last in the file that it is reading. But then that raises the question of, how do we actually weight these selectors? What does it mean to be specific? And the way that this works is actually quite formulaic and easy to calculate. So we split up each type of selector and then we provide them a value. And finally, we count up how many of each type we have and multiply them by the values that we assigned to them. And then at that point, we have an end number, or a weight as we call it, and we choose whichever rule is within a selector that has the highest weight. So the way this will work is inline styles. So this is any style that you write directly in HTML using the style attribute, and we would almost always recommend not to do this. But if you did, those get a weight of 1,000 points. And this essentially is like a trump card. It will almost always just mean that the inline styles are going to be the ones that get displayed. Next, we have the ID selector, which we give a weight of 100 points. And then we have classes, which we give a weight of 10 points, along with pseudo classes and attributes also both get a weight of 10 points. Finally, elements, so the actual element selector, or the name of the tag, gets a single point, as well as pseudo elements also get just a single point. Now let's look back at that example of the two conflicting anchor tags. In the first option, first we have the A element, and elements get 1 point. And then we have the href attribute, and attributes get 10 points. We add these together, and we have 11 total points for the weight of the first option. Then we look at the second selector we had that starts with the section element, which gets 1 point. And then it has the links class, which adds on another 10 points. And then we have the anchor tag element, and this gets 1 more point. And if we add all of these together, we end up with 12 points, meaning that the second option has 12 points over the 11 points of the first option. So the second option is more specific, and the color of the anchor tag will be red. Now that's all there is to CSS specificity. That's basically all the browser is doing when it resolves the conflicts between conflicting declarations. However, sometimes we want the ability to override this, to say a specific declaration should be used regardless of how specific the selector is. And the way we do this is with what we call !important, or the important rule. This goes at the end of a declaration, so after the value but before the semicolon. And this simply says that the declaration is so important that we should use this one regardless of specificity. In fact, this can even overwrite a user style sheet if that user style sheet doesn't use the important rule. Because of this, most of the time we want to avoid using important. It's usually considered a bit of an anti-pattern that goes against the cascading nature of CSS. However, there are times when it can be appropriate. For example, if we are using a library, we might want to use important to override a declaration of that library without worrying about the specificity of the library's selectors. But again, this should be seen as the exception to the rule, because for most CSS, when we write the entire thing, we have full control over all of it, and we should be using specificity to our advantage rather than having to go around it. And that said, that's going to be the end of this video on CSS selector specificity. I hope you found it helpful, and I'll see you in the next one.